been a member of the Institute of Directors for the last 18 years. And for the last 10 years, I've been a judge on their awards locally for the region, and the last 5 years nationally. So we had some interesting discussions this year with myself and Sir Simon Stevens, who's the head of the NHS, who were judging the Corporate Governance Award nationally, which in the end went to Andy at, brain's gone, Aston Martin. So yeah, you do get to look at some little companies when you're doing that. But one of the things that really astounded me over the years is the lack of understanding with people that come in that even are running quite sizable businesses, and they actually haven't got the faintest clue about the roles of a board, the roles of a director, and even the liabilities and the risks that directors undertake. So I apologise if some of this is old hat. Hopefully you will pick up something new as we go along. And the first thing that fools a lot of people is limited liability. A limited liability company, but whose liability is limited? Anybody want to?
Not the directors.
Not the directors, true.
Shareholders.
The liability of the shareholders in a limited liability company is limited to the capital that they put in. So the limited liability company becomes an artificial entity in its own right, but it's the shareholders' liability that is limited. They can't be asked to put their hands in their pockets for any more than the capital they put in to start the business. So what rights have shareholders got? For small companies, yes, shareholders own the company, but in general, for larger companies, shareholders own shares, not the company. The shares bring a right to a dividend, a right to transfer that ownership of the shares so you can sell them, and to vote at a general meeting. So how many of you own shares in companies? How many of you vote at the annual general meeting? Craig does. Most of you, anything like me, is the voting slip comes through, you go, is there a dividend warrant in there? No, stick it in the bin. Actually, you ought to have a look through it because they might be doing something really weird. And if you ignore it and you don't vote, guess who gets your vote? The chairman does, by default, because you didn't say you didn't want to vote against it, so he can vote for it. There can be a complete difference between direction and the directors and the ownership of a company. So the obvious question is, who is a director? Who is a director? I'm a director. Anybody else a director? What authorities do directors have? The ownership, the directors' authority is governed by documents and set down by the owners of the company, set out in the Memorandum and Articles of Association, which I'll come to in a minute. But generally, the ownership and general meetings, voting, tell the directors what to do, but the directors are responsible for the day-to-day running of the business. So directors have a fiduciary responsibility to the shareholders. The directors may not be shareholders in the company. They're accountable to the shareholders. The shareholders have powers of appointment and removal of directors, and they delegate powers to the directors. And this is what's included in lots of Memorandum and Articles of Association. The business of the company shall be managed by the directors, who can exercise all of the powers of the company. Actually, what powers has the company got? You need to look at the memo notes to find out. So the constitutional documents, Memorandum of Association and the Articles of Association. The memos tells you what the company's name is, and it must include limited. The country of registration, because that is going to tell you which law applies, and that the member's liability is limited. If it doesn't say those three things, you ain't got a limited liability company. I know what you have got, but it's not a limited liability company. It also sets out what the share capital is, and what the company's objects are. That is what the company is allowed to do. Now, in the old days, that used to be very specific. You had a company that did this. And if you were doing, you were set up to sell cars and you were selling laptops, actually you were breaking the law because you were doing an activity that was outside the company's powers to do it. But generally these days, the clever lawyers have written the objects clause so wide and varied that most limited companies can do what the hell they feel like doing. The Articles of Association is more a rule book. It sets down the different procedures for general meetings. It actually tells you how the directors have to operate. And that can be a crucial document, particularly if there's a dispute between the directors, to make sure they have actually followed what the articles say. So the organs of the company are the members via general meetings, the board of directors, who again may or may not be shareholders. There's a legal distinction between the members, that's the owners of the business, and the directors of the company. But it can often be confused. The directors are the ones that go to jail if somebody gets killed or they do something really horrible. The shareholders don't. So power and authority within the limited company. Power can be delegated from the shareholders through the board to the management. So authority can be delegated, but responsibility can't. And generally the responsibility stays with the board, not the shareholders. It's the board that carries the can. Very often there are powers that are reserved to the board, so the management can't deal with certain items, such as board appointments, board committees, remuneration committees and change of auditors. Things that you'd expect the board as a whole to have to deal with rather than being delegated to individual managers. And a lot around risk management. Shareholders meetings. There's a lot of confusion over shareholders meetings. All shareholders meetings are general meetings. You can have an annual general meeting, or you can have an extraordinary general meeting. How many of you have got a limited company and you have an annual general meeting because the accountant sends you a bit of paper that you sign that says you've had one and it lasted 4 seconds because that's how long it took you to sign a bit of paper? Yeah. For most of us, that's perfectly okay. But for a larger business or a charity, I'm on the board of a charity, the annual general meeting is important. It's a stupid statement, but business conducted at general meetings is ordinary business or special business. It makes a difference because the amount of votes you need is different. For ordinary business, it's 50%. For special, it's 75% of those present and voting. So if you don't turn up, you could be letting somebody do something you might not want them to do because you weren't there to vote against it. And if you abstain, you're altering the percentages so something could get passed that might not otherwise have done. So, yeah, ordinary resolutions, 50% of the people at the board meeting are those that turn up and those that vote. Or for special resolutions, 75%. And voting can be by a show of hands, or it can be by a secret ballot, depending on the circumstances and whether the board's at loggerheads or not. When's a company deemed to be insolvent? This is a question for you guys. You've got 4 answers. When a company's liabilities exceed its assets, when a company's current liabilities exceed its fixed assets, when a company is unable to pay its debts as and when they fall due, when the company goes into liquidation at a time its assets are insufficient to pay its debts and the costs of winding up. It's also insolvent if its liabilities exceed its assets. Now that's vitally important. If you're running a small business and you normally take your remuneration by running up a director's loan account instead of having a salary and paying national insurance on it and clearing it with a dividend at the end of the year. How many of us do that? But if something goes horribly wrong halfway through the year, and you're unable to pay the debts and Craig has to come in and see it, the first thing he's going to say is, right, this director's loan account that you owe 40,000 quid on, can I have the money please? We said before the shareholders are insulated by limited liability, the directors aren't. And wrongful trading is one of those instances where the directors can get direct personal liability. So that's when they carry on trading when there is no reasonable prospect of avoiding an insolvent liquidation. I got called in by a print business down in London that was turning over 30-ish million. And they wanted me to do a review of their funding options. And based on the information they sent me, I was pretty much whatever funding option they wanted. And they said, well, can you help us manage the relationship with the bank because it's getting a bit fraught? And I should have smelt a rat at that point, because based on the information I'd got that they were giving me, there was absolutely no reason on the planet, other than they might have been a bit lax with their paperwork, that they should have a fraught relationship with their bank. It was a cracking business. It was really good. So I said, that's fine. So when do you have to send the management information to the bank? It's the last day of the month after the month end. So 31st of July, they've got to send the 30th of June management accounts. Great. Okay. So what date do you actually produce the management information? 31st of July. Oh, you don't have it for a few days so you can check it before you have to send it to the bank? No, there's no way we'll get it out before the 31st. So I went down on the 31st of July. I said, where's the management information? Oh, it ain't arrived yet. So we went and had a walk around the factory, and scratching my head a bit as we walked round. And we got back to the MD's office, and we had some sandwiches, and about 2 o'clock, the management information appeared. And she passed it to me, and I went, what the? Oh, hang on a minute, she said. What are you doing? She says, I'm altering it. I said, I beg your pardon? She says, oh, there's a mistake in one of it's all compiled from spreadsheets. There's a mistake in one of the spreadsheets somewhere, and I haven't had time to sort it out, so I'm altering it. Well, what are you altering it to? Well, till it looks right. Oh, okay, so this stock and work in progress figure that you've just altered, were the buildings we didn't go in? Because I'm not actually sure I saw that much paper. Oh, yeah, there's loads in other buildings. Okay. Look, it's your figures, it's up to you. But are you really sure that this is? So a month later, I'm sat there. There's me. There's John Whitbread from Harrison Clark Rickaby's, because I've asked John to come with me. There's an insolvency practitioner that John brought with him, because when I explained what was going on, he thought that was a good idea. There was their auditor. There was the directors and the shareholders. Bear in mind, the shareholders were 73 and 69. And we sat around and went, okay, you've been altering the management accounts for the last 6 or 8 months. Have we got the July figures yet? Or 7 o'clock in the evening, the July figures arrived. They'd lost £600,000 in the month. The directors had for themselves found an asset finance deal from somebody to refinance the plant and machinery to realise some cash. But to get that released from the debenture, they'd got to give Barclays second charges on the buildings that they hadn't got second charges on. And we're going, for Christ's sake, don't do it, because you know. And the auditor sat there and says, I'm not signing these bloody accounts off. And John Whitbread saying, he's here, just appoint him now. 7 o'clock the next morning, we had a conference call, and they said, yeah, we thought about it overnight, and Mr. Corporate Lawyer, we want you to get this asset finance deal drawn down, and we'll be fine, we'll trade out of it. 3 weeks later, when it fell off the cliff, they hadn't made a single payment on the asset finance agreement, which was for £1 million. Barclays then seized all the properties. The unsecured creditors got square root of sod all. I got the request from the insolvency service for my files and a narrative of what had gone on Christmas Eve, which was a lovely way for me to spend Christmas walking through that. And then the following Christmas, I got the report, and 2 of the directors had been banned for life. And what did they ban them for life for? Not for fraud, for fudging the figures for 6 months, not for the £1 million asset finance deal that they must have known they'd never be able to repay. They transferred 150 grand to one of the directors' personal accounts the day before it fell off the cliff, which was so stupid because there was easier ways to do it than that if they wanted to get the money out, but they weren't very clever. Yeah, penalties. Directors may be personally liability to contribute, so they actually come to you for the money and you can be banned for up to 15 years. Directors acting unreasonably, I think the guys in London qualified for that, or negligently, they definitely qualified for that. Entering into contracts with the knowledge of the company's affairs and avoiding the facts, and they definitely got that one. Directors failing to meet their duties. The shareholders still employ the managing director. Don't ask me what hold she's got over them, but they still employ her in a different business. Knowingly carry on the business with a company with intent to defraud creditors or potential creditors, where there is intent to fraud or actual dishonesty. Fraudulent trading. Wrongful and fraudulent trading, even if it's a limited liability company, you as the director can be personally liable for it. Examples of fraudulent trading, actions by officers when they know there are insufficient funds. Well, again, it was wrongful trading in London. It was certainly fraudulent as well. Taking that asset finance deal was just, really? Taking orders or deposits for transactions that can't be fulfilled, play off one bank against another, large variations between the balance sheet and the actual figures. There was certainly a doubt about that one. And paying off debts with directors' guarantees. I've seen that so many times. Here's some money. Can you get me guarantee cancelled? Oh, and we'll knock the company over tomorrow. No, you can't, because the first thing Craig's going to do is say, yeah, give me that money back. Directors' General Duties, Companies Act 2006. These are some duties. You have to act within the powers of the company. So if the company can't do it, you can't do it. As I said, most days these days, the company can do pretty much what it wants. Directors should promote the success of a company. You get many directors going around saying, actually, my company's crap. Gerald Ratner. And where did he do that? At the Institute of Directors at Pall Mall. Not in Pall Mall, at the Albert Hall at the annual convention. Our earrings last long. It costs less than a prawn sandwich, but the prawn sandwich probably lasts longer. To exercise, this is the real one, exercise independent judgment. Directors should not be sat round a board table, or trustees if it's a charity, just going because the bully of a chairman says he wants this done. You are there to act and to deliver independent judgment and to exercise reasonable care, skill and diligence. And if you don't, they can come after you. To avoid conflicts of interest. Generally, that's why you ask at the start of any board meeting if there's any conflicts of interest with anything that's on the agenda. And not to accept benefits from a third party. And to declare any interest in proposed transaction or arrangement. So, success of the company. A director must act in a way he considers in good faith would be most likely to promote the success of the company, of its members as a whole, and in doing so have regard to the employees and the suppliers and the customers and the community and the environment and the company's reputation and the need to act fairly. So actually, even if it's your company, you can't just do what you want willy-nilly. You have to take into account the other stakeholders' interests. Directors, we've already said, directors don't have unlimited authority. You must act in accordance with the company's constitution and only exercise his powers for which they were conferred. So the duty of skill. The same standard of care and diligence that would be exercised by a reasonably diligent person. That's your Clapham Omnibus test. Does these 12 people, if you're in court, think it was reasonable for you to draw that asset finance deal down? Because that's the test you might have to stand up and face. Was it reasonable? To have the general knowledge and skill, having a person knowing the same functions. When banks were being done left, right and centre for mis-selling interest rate swaps, I had a guy ask me to try and put a case together to help him have a go at Allied Irish Bank. It was a horrible interest rate swap they'd stitched him up with. It was awful. But I did point out to him, as a qualified chartered accountant, he really ought to have understood it before he signed it. And the fact that he said he hadn't bothered to read it, well, yeah, you're not going to win that one, Sunshine. Because as a director, with that specialist knowledge, you would have been expected to understand it. This is one that surprises a lot of people. Directors need not give continuous attention to a company's affairs, which is why you see people that are directors of loads of companies, they can't possibly know what's going on in all of them. It's not a requirement. The requirement is that they turn up to board meetings, that they understand what's going on and they act reasonably. You can trust the officials of the company to perform their duties, but you should monitor them. And the directors should attend board meetings. Exercise independent judgment. Yes, you are there as an independent brain, not a nodding dog, but you can take advice. With the charity I'm involved in, I know I put Michael forward to give some advice to the board. We knew we needed to sack the chief exec, but actually we got 2 sets of outside consultants in to review the situation first to make sure that we were doing it the right way, and B, that we had actually got the right decision. Directors may act in accordance with the company's constitution, including shareholders' resolutions. So again, is it a get out if the shareholders told you to do it and you're the director? You might be, might not, it depends what it was. If they told you to go and push somebody off a bridge, probably not. And the amount of discretion you have to do things may be fettered by terms of an agreement which the company is a party. So if you've signed if the company's entered into an NDA agreement with another company, you as a director are bound by that. You can't decide to be independent of it just because it doesn't suit you. Benefits from third parties, we've already said you should not accept benefits from third parties. You should not. Except if it cannot be regarded as likely to give rise to a conflict of interest. So actually you can accept a benefit from a third party as long as you are satisfied that it is not going to influence your decision to give them a big contract. So John, it was very nice of you to invite me to the dinner at the Safari Park the other week. Thank you very much. It was a benefit from the third party. John invited me out to dinner. Did it influence me to do anything? Well, it influenced me that I like John, but apart from that, no. Bribery Act 2010. We don't want to be involved in bribery. And every limited company, even a one-man band limited company, should have an anti-bribery policy. That should keep it up to date. Declaration of personal interests, which could be transactions or arrangements to which the company is not party, if they have an influence on the company's market or potential market. Proposed transactions which the company will be a party. You shouldn't be getting involved if you're going to get a benefit out of it because the company's won a contract, the back underpayment. And existing transactions with which the company is a part. So anything like that, where you have a personal interest, you must declare it, and that probably means you can't vote on the proposal. Directors are not normally liable except for wrongful trading or fraudulent trading when they can be, or if the director has signed cheques, purchase orders and promissory notes where the company's name does not appear legibly. So just be careful what you're signing. Parish versus British Airways was the case when I was doing my banking exams. It just said Parish on the chequebook, it didn't say Parish Limited, and Mr. Parish signed the cheque and it bounced. And who did British Airways sue? Mr. Parish, where it's not clear the director is acting as agent for the company. So again, if you're signing for the company, for and on behalf of, or if the director knowingly exceeds his authority. And this is the classic one. Oh, I've resigned as a director. Martin, we were having this conversation earlier. You can't have me on my guarantee because I'm not a director anymore. Tough. You signed a guarantee, that's a personal guarantee. It's got nothing to do with whether you were a director or not. You signed it, give me the money. And fraudulent or negligent misstatements, it comes back to the wrongful trading and the fraudulent trading we talked about earlier. Who can take action against the directors? Actually, the company can. I said earlier, you've run your director's loan account up because you were planning to take it from a dividend at the end of the year, but you never get to the end of the year because the knock-on effect of other businesses going down comes. The company wants that director's loan back. So Craig, acting as the company, could sue you for that money. And if you've got personal assets, and you're being particularly difficult, that's exactly what they'll do, because you owe the money to the company. The regulators can take action against the directors. The Crown can take action against the directors, particularly for things like corporate manslaughter. And the shareholders, again, the case in London, the shareholders hadn't got a bloody clue what was going on. They could, and in my mind should, have taken action against the directors, because they destroyed 8 million quid's worth of value for those two brothers. And other stakeholders. So in certain circumstances, other stakeholders, that's employees, creditors, could come after the directors personally if they can demonstrate that there is a case for that. A director-in-law is any person occupying a position of director by whatever name they are called. So vice president, head of, whatever you want to call it. You can have executive and does anybody know the difference between an executive and a non-executive director? Non-executive director takes no part generally in the day-to-day running of the business. They attend the board meetings and they put their fourpenny in at the board meetings, and then they go away again. Well, they're there to act as a mentor or an advisor to the directors, but they're not generally there to do the day-to-day running of the business. Nominee directors. So, John could appoint a nominee director to attend in his place at a board meeting if that suited him to do and the rules of the company allowed him to do that. Or an alternate director. Shadow directors. That's a sneaky one that arrived a few years ago. Shadow directors. People who are having an influence on the business but aren't actually a director can be classed as a shadow director and therefore be subject to all the same. So someone in accordance with whose instruction the board is accustomed to act. So the undischarged bankrupt, very often what happens is they appoint their wife as a director of the new company. The wife hasn't got a clue what's going on. He's doing it all, but she's the director because he can't be. Well, he's a shadow director, and if it goes horribly wrong, he's going to get done with a bit of luck just the same. Non-executive directors should be done away with altogether. It is dangerous nonsense to assume that part-time Neds know enough to spot problems. Lord Young, what a genius that man was. Neds are about as much use as Christmas tree decorations. Tiny Rowlands. Anybody remember Tiny Rowland? Got into a big spat with Harrods, didn't he? Neds are like a B-Day. No one knows what they do, but they add a touch of class. Michael Grade. The Institute of Directors takes a very different view. Non-executive directors are a very good idea, mainly because they stop the nodding dog syndrome, or they should do. They're outside the day-to-day running of the business. They're not under the direct sway of a very powerful MD or chairman. They should be there to challenge. They're also there to provide contacts, to act as a confidant, particularly if there's a dispute amongst members of the board, a conciliator to try and help smooth those issues over, a checker of board processes. The board, if they're all executive, if they're all involved in the day-to-day, they're so close to the coalface, they probably can't see the errors that are going on. So you need somebody who's taking a step back and looking at it with a fresh pair of eyes. A crisis manager. When we sacked the chief executive, actually the chair of the board of trustees stepped in for a few days to hold the fort till an interim was appointed. And a coach or a mentor to the executive directors. It's somebody on the board that you can turn to for support and advice. And they are there to be the conscience of the company. The directors of the board are all steaming along down this way because the powerful MD says this is a really good idea, and then you've got the NED goes, hang on a minute, have you really thought this through? If you do that, this is likely to happen, and we're going to have all these people made redundant. Is that what we really want to happen? So Neds, very, very important. They should be independent. Under the UK Corporate Governance Code, and this is the Corporate Governance Code that was drawn up in at the request of the government about 4 years ago. They should not have been employees of the company in the previous 5 years. They should not have had a material interest in the company within the previous 3 years, so they should be an ex-shareholder. They shouldn't receive any income other than their directors' fees that are agreed for turning up to the board meetings. They shouldn't participate in the company share option or performance-related remuneration or pension schemes. They should only be paid for the board meetings that they attend to. That way they keep their independence. They shouldn't have close family ties with the company's advisors, directors or senior employees. So we're not going to bring everybody's wives in as non-exec directors because that really wouldn't be a good idea. They shouldn't have conflicting cross-directorships or represent significant shareholders. And they shouldn't serve for more than 9 years, because after 9 years, believe me, you've gone native. You've joined the nodding dogs. The Higgs Review, 2003. So these were a director's duties: to promote the success of the company by directing and supervising the company's affairs, to provide entrepreneurial leadership within a framework of prudent controls, which enable risks to be assessed, and to set the company's strategic aims to ensure necessary financial and HR resources are in place to meet the company's objectives. The board and the directors are all there to meet the objectives of the company. The board should be there to monitor performance and conformance and to monitor risk. The board's not just there to shout at people because they haven't hit their sales target. If they're not hitting their sales targets, they should be looking at why and doing something about it at a structural level. Board information should have sufficient data in it to enable the board members to make prudent decisions about what's going on in the company. Understand risk. And risk should be on every board's agenda every time, particularly if it's something like the charity I'm on the board of and they're losing £750,000 a year and eating through the reserves at an amazing rate. We've updated our risk register 6 times in the last 6 board meetings, mainly because I keep demanding that they change it. A business with a properly functioning board makes better decisions, is typically more profitable, has greater longevity and is less vulnerable. It protects the individual directors by holding each other to account. Now you might say, my business is too small to have a board. It might well be, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't have somebody that you can use as a confidant, whether it's a quasi-board meeting, but you shouldn't just plough ahead just with your idea the whole time. It makes sense to get other people's input and opinions. If there's a serious accident, the board does not assess the risk and put proper measures in place to manage and minimise the risk, the directors will be liable. If you're a director, to say I did not know is not a defence. You're a director, you're supposed to know. If you're a shareholder, it might be, because you might not have anything to do with the day-to-day running of the business. But directors, that's what part of being a director is. You should know what's going on in the company. So there you go. The key point is, even with very small businesses, get some support. Have somebody that can act as a non-executive director, whether that's a coach, a mentor, somebody you can talk to and bounce ideas off. You will end up making better decisions. You will have a better business. You will be more profitable. Your business will do much better. There you go. Corporate governance, a bit of a bugbear of mine. I hope you got something of value out of that. I hope it wasn't just trudging through stuff you've already know, but thank you very much.